Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I'm proud to bring you Living HELLENISMOS with Tony Mierzwicki. Greetings and welcome, Tony.
How are you today, Hercules?
I'm doing great, and I'm really looking forward to your show because you have on it the great Apollonius.
Indeed. Apollonius, who normally doesn't need an introduction, but you'll get an introduction just in case there's one person out there who's not familiar with him.
So I will be here. Holler if you need me.
Okay, so like I said, we're very pleased to have Apollonius, also known as John Opsopaus, PhD, also known as Bruce McLennan, PhD, on the show today to talk about his latest book, The Tablet of Cebes, with illustrations adapted from Hans Holbein the Younger. I reviewed this book for my Pathos blog, Holistic Spirituality, in January 2023 and wanted to learn a little bit more about it. But first, let's look at the author's background. Apollonius has practiced magic, divination, and neo-paganism since the 1960s. He has more than 30 publications in various magical and neo-pagan magazines and designed the Pythagorean Tarot and wrote the Comprehensive Guide to the Pythagorean Tarot, The Wisdom of Hypatia, Ancient Spiritual Practices for a More Meaningful Life, The Oracles of Apollo, The Secret Texts of Hellenic Polytheism, a Practical Guide to the Restored Pagan Religion of George Gemistos Plethon, as well as the Tablet of Cebes. Apollonius frequently presents workshops excuse me, on Hellenic magic and neo-paganism, Pythagorean theurgy, divination, and related topics. He is a member of the Grey Council and is the past dean of the departments of mathemagics and ceremonial magic at the Grey School of Wizardry. Apollonius was a Third Circle member of the Church of All Worlds, past coordinator of the Scholars Guild for the Church of All Worlds, and past archon of the Hellenic kin of ADF, which stands for A Druid Fellowship. He is also a university professor with more than 25 years of experience reading ancient Greek and Latin. Apollonius, thanks for making yourself available and coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Okay, so we may as well get started. I really enjoyed your book, The Tablet of Cebes. You wrote that scholars disagree about the philosophical background of the tablet. It has been argued that it comes out of Pythagorean, Platonic, Cynic, and Stoic traditions, or various mixtures of these. I was wondering, which way do you personally lean?
Well, I actually, as you know, and I think we'll talk about later, it can be interpreted on many different levels. And so I lean to a Stoic interpretation on what is called the allegorical level, and a Pythagorean interpretation or a Pythagorean Platonic interpretation at the symbolic level. So, you know, that's one of the things about these multiple levels of interpretation. You can have two essentially independent interpretations that are both equally valid at the same time. But the explicit philosophy is really basically Stoic. If you're familiar with Stoicism from Marcus Aurelius or from Epictetus or anyone like that, it's you know, it all sounds like the sort of thing that you would expect from a Stoic. You know, if you look at it very closely, you can say, well, yeah, but you know, maybe a Stoic wouldn't have said this in this way, and this looks a little bit more like it's a Cynic, or it's a little bit more something else. But you know, these are just names we use to categorize these different spiritual practices and philosophies, and especially by the date of this text, you know, they're all kind of mixing together. It's kind of like, you know, I kind of compare it to sort of the modern New Age and magical pagan community. You know, it's like, well, you know, are they doing witchcraft? Well, yeah, sort of. It's not Gardnerian and it's not Alexandrian, but you know, it's kind of this and kind of that, because they pick up some ideas from here and pick up some ideas from there, and these things all evolve as people go on. And so I don't think we can necessarily make a very precise determination of what school, so to speak, the author is coming from. But I would say the most obvious interpretation at the allegorical level is a Stoic.
Okay, thanks. So what can you tell us about Cebes, the supposed author of the text which you translated?
Well, he's a famous figure about which we know very little. His dates, as I recall, are 430 to 350. I don't know how secure those dates are. BCE, of course. He was a contemporary of Socrates, and in fact, where he is mostly known from is in Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, which narrates Socrates' discussions about death and life after death and the soul and so forth, just before he was executed. And present at that meeting was Cebes, was one of the people present. And so the dialogue written by Plato, we have to remember, about those events has Cebes asking some very pointed questions and engaging in a very critical sort of dialogue with Socrates about these ideas. Now, Cebes himself appears to have been a Pythagorean. And again, these are the sorts of things that scholars pick up when they look at the ancient Greek text, because some of the words that Cebes uses, some of his attitudes are very consistent with Pythagoreanism. And he was a student of Philolaus, who was the first Pythagorean to write down the secret doctrines of Pythagoras. So apparently he was a Pythagorean of some sort, but he was also studying with Socrates and was at least known by Plato. Now, again, this is all from Plato's dialogue, which, people argue about how factual it is. It's one of his early dialogues, so it seems to be relatively factual. But again, it is a literary construction, and so you can't take the details too literally. So Cebes is mentioned in a few other places. He supposedly wrote a few texts, but none of them survive. As is typical with many of the pre-Socratic philosophers, which I think he would be classified as pre-Socratic. So we don't know much about him, except that he was probably a Pythagorean and interested in Socrates' teachings, and in that sense, sort of an early Platonist as well.
And you also pointed out that he could not have possibly been the author of the text because he was contemporary with Socrates, whereas the text was probably written in the 1st or 2nd century CE.
That's right. So this is something that scholars and philologists determine on the basis of the language that's used, basically the form of Greek at that time and some of the vocabulary that was in use at that time. But it's very hard to date it much more securely than that. There appear to be some references to it, I believe as early as the 1st century BC, but they don't name it. And so maybe they're not references to this text. Maybe they're references to some other text. I think it's a century or two later, if I remember correctly, that the text is, there's a reference to it by name. So it's been argued anywhere from, I think, 2nd century BC to 4th century CE. And, but yeah, 1st or 2nd century CE seems to be the best guess. So much later, hundreds of years later, than Cebes lived. The other ambiguity I should point out is what this text does is it's oriented around a tablet of some sort, a picture or an engraving, something that has been put up in a temple with this picture on it. And the text then describes this picture. It's again a sort of a dialogue where there's an ancient sage that's describing the different things on this in this picture and what it means. And so the title of the text is the Tablet of Cebes. So what does that mean? Titles weren't the same in the ancient world as they are. They didn't put titles on things, generally speaking. And so people called them by names, and the names, sometimes the same text would have several different names. And so the Tablet of Cebes could mean the document called the tablet written by Cebes. Well, that can't literally be true because he was born hundreds of years too early for that language. But, people, there was a lot of pseudo-Pythagorean literature that was attributed to Pythagoras, but again, could not have been written by him. This was one thing that the ancients did, is they would often attribute their text to the great master that had preceded them and was the founder of their school. Essentially, they felt it was kind of arrogant to put their own name on a text, and so they felt it would honor their founder to put his name on the text. So it could be something like that somebody wrote this thing who was a disciple many centuries later of Cebes and decided to put Cebes' name on it. Or the of Cebes part could be part of the title. So the title of the text could be the Tablet of Cebes. And what that could mean is that Cebes was the one that put up this tablet in this temple of Kronos that's described in the text. And since the tablet doesn't survive, so far as we know, there's no way of telling. And I mean, there's no other record that says that Cebes put up this tablet as a dedication in the temple somewhere. So there's no other evidence that could be we could look at for that. So who knows? It could be a complete fiction. From the most unlikely, perhaps, but literal meaning on one hand, Cebes put up a tablet in the temple, and many years later, somebody described what this inscription was like. That would be the most literal interpretation. The most fictional interpretation would be the whole thing is just a fiction. People write those too. And it in fact fits in a well-established literary genre of describing images or pictures in words, usually with some sort of moral purpose. And this goes back all the way to the shield of Achilles in the Iliad. And there's a number of others. There's a shield of Heracles and a shield of Aeneas, and Lucian's pictures. So there's a bunch of these things. So it's kind of a literary genre. So it certainly would not, be surprising if somebody just sat down and decided to write this thing one day.
So I would assume that the tablet is written in Koine Greek, which is the language of the New Testament.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very common kind of Greek. It's not a high literary sort of Greek, but still ancient Greek, of course.
Of course. You wrote that in ancient times, an inspired text could be interpreted simultaneously at 4 levels: the literal, allegorical, symbolical, and anagogical. Could you walk us through these 4 levels, give us an introduction to them?
Sure. This is, I think, very important for trying to get at the deeper meanings of ancient texts. And this would apply really to any culture. So the literal level is what the words say on the page. And so, the example I give is if it says, so-and-so walked around the temple, it means so-and-so walked around the temple. Whether it's fiction or history, the meaning is literally what it says on a physical level. That you might call sort of the plain meaning of the text. So the allegorical level is where the author usually intends an additional layer of meaning. So objects, people, actions, events locations, all of the different components of the story have an additional meaning. And so a person might represent a virtue like justice or courage, or a vice like cowardice or dishonesty. And a action like going on a long journey might represent the path of life, from the start of the journey through all of the various things that happen along the way to the end of the journey, and so on. And so, through the centuries, lots of allegorical stories have been written where the author is intending, by describing some usually interesting, but I don't know, not quite so important story, to convey some other deeper meaning in this indirect way. Now, in the case of the Tablet of Cebes, there's a very clear allegorical meaning, because almost all the figures, in fact, in the story are given names that are their allegorical meanings. So we have education and truth and luxury and deceit. These are the names of the characters in the text. And as I like to point out, which maybe is not obvious to most people, is that ancient Greek was written in all capital letters. Small letters had not been invented. And so they didn't do things like capitalize words to indicate that they were proper names. And so if you see a word like dike for justice, well, you don't know, is that justice with a small j or justice with a big J, a personification. So this is why I say the allegorical meaning in the Tablet of Cebes is very clear, because the names given to the figures are generally abstract qualities of some sort, like truth, justice, luxury, deceit, and so forth. So we know what these figures represent. There's no secret about it. There's no mystery. We don't have to, kind of read at some deeper level. It's laid out there right in front of us. Now, an interesting thing is, of course, remember that what the Tablet of Cebes purports to be is a description of a picture. So the picture doesn't have these labels on it. It's the old man, the exegete, or the old sage, who's there with a pointer pointing at these figures, and he's the one that's calling them truth and justice and deceit and things like that. So you might say, well, wait a minute, we don't know that Cebes, or whoever made this tablet, that's the intended meaning. That's just what this old man says the meaning is. He's essentially giving the allegorical meaning. So that's another layer. There's many layers of indirection and possible misdirection in this thing, because you've got an image, which is already a representation of something else. And then you've got an old man describing this image and interpreting it for this group of visitors that have come and seen this image. And then one of those visitors is writing the text of the Tablet of Cebes. So that's his recollection of what the old man said, with his own interpretation perhaps layered on too. And now we're reading it too. See, so how many layers of indirection we've got in this thing. So anyway, so the allegorical level is where there's at the literal level, there's a specific denotative meaning for each word. Man means a human being. At the allegorical level, there's usually also a very specific meaning for each word, but it's something other than its ordinary meaning. And that's intended to carry a different story, tell you a different story. And that's the one that I say in the Tablet of Cebes is primarily a story of a Stoic story of how to live well. Now, the symbolic level, symbolism, true symbolism, I mean, we use symbol in a very broad way, but true symbolism in sort of a Jungian sense, these are the things that connect us with the gods. So the Neoplatonists say that the gods emanate down into the material universe, and that everything in the material universe is in the lineage of some deity. And that includes animals, plants, gemstones, metals, all of these things, but also words, ideas, excuse me, things like that as well. And so symbols are important because they're in the lineage of a god, they can in effect tune our minds to the particular energy of that god. So if that symbol is activated in our mind, in our subconscious mind in particular, that essentially is tuning our mind to the energy of a particular god. And so again, visual images are often symbols. You see a picture of a caduceus and you think of Hermes, okay, that activates that energy. So Neoplatonists make use of symbols as ways of essentially working at a level of our mind that we don't have direct access to, and tuning our mind so that we participate in the energy of a particular deity. So the symbolic level works at that level. So the particular events, individuals, and so forth at the symbolic level are activating these symbols in our subconscious mind and doing this connection for us. Now, typically, the symbolic level is something that's hard to do consciously because it's essentially a function of our unconscious mind. So the unconscious mind can influence what we do consciously. And so when, especially an ancient artist or poet, but modern ones also, when they're inspired, that really means that they're getting energy from a particular deity that is activating these symbols in their mind and then influencing what they write on the page or paint on the canvas or whatever it may be. And so they're usually not so conscious. In fact, they may be kind of blown away. Why did I write that? Boy, that's really interesting. I really never thought of that before. And, you hear about authors saying the characters start, writing their own stories. I'm just writing it down. They're telling me what's going on. Well, that's because these symbols have been activated in their mind. They're literally inspired or even possessed sometimes by the deity and then are acting it out. So an author may be writing at that symbolic level, but essentially what that means is that divine energy is flowing directly through them into whatever they're creating. And those symbols are being embodied in what they're creating. And then when somebody else comes along and reads the text and is sensitive to it, or views the painting or inscription, those symbols get activated in their mind and make a connection with the divine that is similar to what was taking place in the artist. Of course, it's always individual. I think when you kind of let the work on you, and open yourself to it, then that symbolic meaning can start to come through. And then again, the synchronicities start to happen. All of the things start falling into place because, in fact, there's an order there, a harmony that is hidden below the surface. So it's because of this that it's very difficult to create at the symbolic level, except by essentially doing a kind of theurgy, basically invoking the muse, not just as saying it, but literally invoking the muse and feeling if the muse is inspiring you, and then creating. Then you can be composing at the symbolic level too. So I see here, and others have seen also, that there's a symbolic layer of meaning in this text as well. Because you might say, well, at the allegorical level, this is sort of moralistic, and it's kind of it's a transparent allegory because everybody's named whatever they're supposed to be. And it's kind of like, well, this doesn't seem like great literature. Well, I think at that other level, at that symbolic level that is not explicit, that's implicit in what's going on, that's where I think the most interesting meaning is. And then at the topmost level of interpretation is really not so much a level of interpretation at all. That's the anagogical level. This is the level that raises you up to the gods. And just as these symbols have come down, as they begin to work in you and begin to modify your soul, reprogram your soul, perhaps, but in a sense, modify your soul, and at very least tune it to that divine energy. That's the means of theurgical ascent that begins to raise us up to that divine level. So again, that's a really anagogical text is again, it's a person doesn't write one of those. Again, it's the work of the gods through some human writer to be able to put that much power into the text itself, that thus reading the text and allowing it to work on you actually does the work of a theurgical ascent. So it becomes a tool of theurgy. And the best sacred texts, true sacred texts, have all of these four levels in them. And that's why, reading a sacred text, again, with the proper openness and receptiveness, can cause a spiritual experience. Now, I don't know if I would claim that the Tablet of Cebes has an anagogical level, and whether it reaches that level of power, really. I can't say that it's worked that way on me, but maybe I just haven't spent enough time with it, or read it, and contemplated it enough. It has, again, like anything else, it has to be contemplated, read slowly, thought about, to have its effect on you. So those are the four levels. The Neoplatonists were very interested in allegorical and symbolical interpretations of Homer. Homer was considered a sacred text, and Hesiod. And later Plato's dialogues were considered basically sacred texts as well. That would, again, and I think this happens to people still. You can read Plato's, Phaedo is one of them, but Symposium is one of my favorites, and have a spiritual experience. They're not just dry philosophical texts.
Gosh, there's a hell of a lot to unpack there. But there are a couple of things that jump out at me. The first thing was that you talked about two mechanisms that can be used by writers to channel information from the divine. The first is to allow symbols to activate within, and the second was to invoke the muses. So are these two complementary methods, or are they both two ways of looking at the same thing? Just trying to get my head around it.
Well, they're interrelated, because the way you invoke the muse is probably by using symbols. So, and this could be a formal sort of theurgical invocation, but that would involve a prayer to the muse. And prayers, classical prayers, involve symbols. When you're narrating the accomplishments of the deity, you are activating symbols of that deity in your subconscious. When you recall myths about that deity, again, you're activating symbols in your subconscious that connect you with that deity. So the invocation of the muse itself, like I say, it's not just a simple, oh, I invoke the muse to help my writing. Well, that's not going to do it. I mean, you have to do something more. You either have to at least feel that much more intensely, or you have to use some of the tools of theurgy, like a formal prayer, which involves, again, narrating some of the mythology of the deity, narrating the deity's names and epithets, and then also perhaps using other kinds of symbols as well, incense, symbols, written symbols or drawn symbols, whatever you found it works for that deity. So that's the invocation, and that then will be activating those symbols inside you that connect with the deity. And then you're asking the deity, in effect, the muse, I'll just call her, to activate symbols in again, other symbols in you, perhaps, that are the ones more relevant to to whatever you're doing, whatever you're creating. And so that's where where do these ideas come from? Where do ideas come from? Oh, I need a character so-and-so, or, oh, he's going to do that. Or, I'll put such and such in my painting here. Where do these ideas come from? Well, they come from your subconscious, basically, which really means they're coming from the muse. So you're asking to have those inspirations that then will be used. Because if you just sort of calculate it and figure it out, follow up, I don't know, I'm using a story as an example here, but a plot outline and say, oh, I got to have a bad guy, and I've got to have this, and I got to have a love interest, and you do it. Well, that's not inspired, that's just following a formula. So you want stuff to be coming that you don't know where it comes from, because what that means is it's coming from the gods. And so what's happening is symbols are being activated in your subconscious, which are then bubbling up or influencing your conscious mind. Where the sculptor sees an image in the stone. I mean, that image has come from his subconscious and now is being essentially projected onto the stone, and they can see what they want to do. I don't know. Hopefully that makes it a little clearer anyway.
No, that makes perfect sense. I've been hearing very, very similar stuff over the years where writers will channel information after writing it down. It's like they almost have no recollection of where it came from. I've also heard what you said about sculptors saying that they're just freeing up an image that they already knew what was in the stone that they're carving. The other thing that comes to mind is musicians. A lot of musicians will trance while they're improvising, and then they'll have no recollection of where the music came from. So they listen to a recording of what they just played. It's like, whoa, did I actually play that? Because it's something that they've channeled.
Yeah, and in fact, also not only improvising. I mean, as an excellent example, but even just performing. Musicians will be saying, "What's happening? How are we doing this?" And it's a kind of possession again. So yes, that's important in everything, really. Certainly in all of the arts, though. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, improvisation obviously is something that's being channeled, but every performer will interpret a piece that they're playing. So every time they'll play that piece, it'll be slightly different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first thing that jumped out at me while you were talking before. The second thing that jumped out at me, and this may seem a bit of a stretch, was that you pointed out that when you're working at the anagogical level, then you're actually elevating yourself to the divine. So would it be appropriate to incorporate ascension techniques, visualizing yourself traveling through the spheres, inhaling sunlight? Would that be an appropriate thing, or is that too much of a stretch?
I don't think that's too much of a stretch, but I think what I would suggest actually is using visualizations and techniques that are actually go along with the story in the text. So the story in the text takes you through all of these steps. It takes you through 4 ascending levels. Through into 4 progressively deeper rings. You go through gateways. You have various encounters. There's an ascent and then there's a descent. So another way to use this text would be as an actual ritual. I mean, you could act it out, with a group and have this whole thing acted out. But you could also do it in your head, and I think that would be the more anagogical way to interpret it, is just, do it as a very detailed visualization, with whatever helps you have also for putting you in that kind of a state. But I would suggest following the text itself, because it is, it is an ascent already. That is exactly the structure of the text. And in fact, something I discovered in working on the text, and I haven't seen anyone mention it before, is it's 43 chapters long. They're very small chapters. Some of them are only like a paragraph or two. And you say, 43, well, that's kind of a random number. But when you look at the text, what is 43? It's 2 times 21 plus 1. And what you find out is there are 21 chapters in the ascent. And then the pinnacle chapter is the 22nd chapter. And then there are 22 chapters or 21 chapters in the descent. Furthermore, the 21 chapters in the ascent divide very naturally into 3 groups of 7 chapters. The 21 descent don't divide quite so neatly. They divide as 7, 6, and 8.
Wow.
I think, that's what but it's there's some other funny things about the end of the text also, but anyway, it's a very progressive sort of process that it takes you through. And so, you may be familiar with, like things like ascending through the planetary spheres and the Corpus Hermeticum and in the PGM rituals and stuff like that. Well, this is another ascent, but it's not through the planetary spheres. It's through a different set of rings, and so it's a different system. Some of the Corpus Hermeticum goes through the 12, signs of the zodiac, or the decans, or the planetary spheres. So, there's all sorts of different ways you can do this depending on how you structure your cosmology. But the tablet has a different one that, I would suggest, trying that,
You actually, in your answer, you preempted a question I was going to ask you a little bit later on, and that was about whether the Tablet of Cebes could be used by groups rather than just individuals. And you said that it could. So I was wondering if you could flesh out your answer. So, obviously a coven or some magical order could start working through the text and use it as a rite of ascension, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a mystery play, essentially. And so it could be acted out either in front of people who are just spectators, or it could be done as a ritual in which everyone participates in some way. Again, you could do it quite literally what the tablet says. I mean, there might be some practical complications, but you'd have 4 rooms perhaps that you went through, and gates and various gatekeepers, various it's a little bit like some of the stuff in the Eleusinian mysteries too, various antagonists that would essentially challenge you, to go on or not, and ultimately to go to to get to the Acropolis of eudaimonia, or happiness, and then to descend back down again. And there was there's things that take place on the descent back down as well. But now you're initiated. You see, by the time you get to the Acropolis, you've been initiated, and now you're coming back down as an initiate. And so depending on how many people were available and the facilities they had available, they could do the thing quite literally. And I think it would be very powerful. I've never done it and I've never seen it done, but it could be done quite literally. But if you think of it as a mystery play, essentially the script for a mystery play, then you can see those possibilities a little bit better.
You actually pointed out that interest in the Tablet of Cebes started waning in the 20th century. So hopefully with your book, there'll be a rekindling of interest in it, and perhaps people will start working through it. I mean, the scenario that you described sounded almost Masonic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, the Masonic rituals are in some sense rooted in ancient mystery plays as well. Yeah. Yeah, but it certainly could be done Masonic style.
Just backtracking a little bit, we talked about the 4 levels that inspired texts can be interpreted on. It seems to me that that is of pivotal importance because that particular technique can be used on numerous ancient texts, and you've kind of given a very general sort of answer as to how things can be interpreted on those 4 levels. Do you think you'd be able to walk us through a paragraph or 2 of the Tablet of Cebes just to show how that interpretation could work, just giving very specific examples, or do you think that's already been covered? I'm just going to leave it up to you.
Well, let's see if I can pick out some here that might be. So I got a copy here, by the way. Let's see what chapter what I just closed it up. So one of the things that takes place, one part that's pretty standard stuff is that the seeker, I'll call him in this story, has to kind of what he's trying to do is find out what's important in life and what's not important in life. And one of the things he has to learn is that you may be dealt good luck and bad luck by fortune. It's largely random. And basically you should ignore whichever it is, whether you're lucky or unlucky at any given time. You should kind of ignore that. And that what is not so important are the various sorts of things that most people pursue in life: money, fame, reputation, what have you, excessive pleasure, and so forth. And so people who have discovered that, as the seeker does, that leads to bad consequences, then will find, or may find, if they're lucky, a gate. And this gate leads to a ring that's the ring of pseudo-education, false education. And this is a very interesting thing, because this is where all the scholars reside. All of the people that are experts in all of the different stuff, including various philosophies and stuff like that. And part of the lesson, if you like, at the allegorical level and really to symbolical level too, is all that stuff is fine. It even can be helpful, but that's not what's going to help you to live a happy life. And so, now where was I going with this? So this what this is telling you is at the allegorical level is that there's a gate that you have to find, even if you're well educated, and well off. There's this gate you have to find, and that if you get through this, so what does that mean? It means that it's not easy to see. And it may even take some work to get through it. But there's a way from the ring of pseudo-education to get into the inner ring, which is true education. And that's part of the symbolic meaning of the gate, is you have to find that gate. Now, what the sage is explaining to the people, because they can see the whole picture, is beyond the gate, it's very rough. There's no path. It's rugged landscape. Well, what does that mean? Well, the allegory is not spelled out there, but it's pretty obvious. It means it's hard, it's tough. It's going to take some work, and there won't necessarily be anyone to show you the way. So you'll have to work hard. Now, he does say that he'll come up to this cliff, and there's apparently no way up the cliff. And so he says, well, what are you going to do about that? And so the sage says, well, look up there. He says, you see, there's two women, and they're described as very dignified women standing at the top of the cliff. This I'm reading here. This is from chapter 16. And he says, now here's the allegorical level. Their names are self-control and perseverance. Well, that's a pretty transparent allegory, right? But he says they will help pull you up the cliff. And then once you're up the cliff, then the going's easy. It's a garden, there's greenery, there's pathways, there's no more climbing and stuff like that. So, he's saying there's another obstacle you have to get past, but you'll get help. Now, at an allegorical level, what is the help? Self-control and perseverance. He said you got to have self-control and perseverance. Okay, well, that's good advice, but not too astonishing. But here's the thing. The terminology that's used here is the terminology of salvation. The Greek words that are used is the terminology of salvation from the mysteries. And so these two figures, self-control and perseverance, they appear to be the saving daimons that occur in the mysteries at a certain stage. That once you get far enough and show enough of your own initiative and perseverance and self-control, they will help you. They will pull you up, and then the going will be much easier. So these are divine figures. The symbolical meaning, I would say, is that these are divine helpers that are going to help you to the next stage of the initiation. And so there's purifying daimons, and there's saving daimons, and there's punishing daimons for correcting you. And they all appear in the tablet. They're not called that. But again, the terminology, like there's a lot of purification, katharos terminology when he's talking about the daimons that are the purifying daimons. And there's talk about medical purges and purgatives and doctors, so that's at the symbolism is of a purification or a purgation. But again, there are these divine figures that are administering the medicine, just like in the mysteries, you might be given a potion to represent your purification, or a baptism, any sort of process like that to do sort of a magical purification. So that would be one instance there. Now, when he gets up to the citadel of happiness, so this is almost all of the way up in the ascent, they ask, again, this is the people talking to the old sage. They say, well, what's that castle up there, or that on the Acropolis? And he says, that's the dwelling of the happy ones. Okay, well, again, very sort of obvious and not too surprising allegorical meaning. But this, again, the terminology that's used in the Greek is very close to the chorus of the blessed. So again, this is the last stage of the initiation, where the choir of the blessed welcome in and bring in the new initiate and make him or her part of the congregation, you might say, part of the group of initiates. And again, this could be acted out very literally in a ritual. So that again is the claim of one of the interpreters of the tablet, Robert Joly, is that early on, the daimon, as it's called, that appears right at the beginning of the text, has a scroll in his hand. He has a scroll and a staff. just like the sage, interestingly. But this scroll, Joly says, represents the secret knowledge of the mysteries, because every mystery religion had some secret doctrines that could not be spoken outside of the mysteries. And so because the tablet is giving this secret doctrine, it can't do it explicitly because it could be read by anybody. So it's all under the level, and it's hinted at. It's hinted at, we might say by, what do they call now, dog whistles, phrases that somebody who had been initiated in the mysteries would say, I get what he's talking about. Those are the saving diamonds. Those are the purifying diamonds. Oh, that's the choir of the blessed, and begin to see more easily what this other level is, this Pythagorean or a kind of level, what it's talking about. It's talking about much more of a mystery school type of initiation than, like I said, sort of a, certainly beneficial, very, very valuable Stoic philosophy is good too, but this deeper Pythagorean level is there as well. And again, it's not explicit, there's no direct meanings. It's the events and the scenes and the whole progression, and some of the words will activate those symbols within the mind of the reader. Again, even for us, and now in our age, if we say salvation, well, it has a religious flavor to it, right? So if you see in the text references to salvation, it's going to, hint at that there's something more going on and sort of activate those symbols within you as well. And then when you see the seeker being helped, saved by these two figures on the cliff edge, again, it's the symbolism is pretty clear there. So that would be one example I would give of that. There's another example, but that's probably the good one.
No, that was really good. I was just going to ask you something, unless I misread it. There was one thing that threw me a little bit in the text, and that was that pseudo-education had its place. It was obviously inferior to true education, but it has its place. And it kind of confused me a little bit.
Well, I think, if you think, let's suppose that, just to make a concrete example, suppose that part of true education is a true philosophical understanding of Plato's dialogues, for example, okay? And what they teach. Well, you can go to college, and take a college philosophy course and read Plato's dialogues. Well, so that's a help along the way, because now you've read Plato's dialogue. That doesn't mean you've understood them, and it doesn't mean you've understood them in the way that will help, but at least you've read them. Somebody who hasn't read them will have to learn those things in some other way. He will have to perhaps read them on his own, which is not easy, and understand them, or he will have to understand these things get them from a teacher, or just figure them out by themselves, whatever. So in other words, formal education, which is really what pseudo-education corresponds to in many words, it's the more advanced professional level of education. If we're thinking about, maybe 2nd century CE, it represents the more advanced stuff of pre-professional kind of education, which is valuable, right? You got to have a job, you got to feed yourself, you got to feed your family. It's valuable, but also in particular things like literature and especially mathematics, because mathematics is really essential to Pythagoreanism to put you in contact with the Platonic forms more easily. Those disciplines can help. The danger is, of course, they become an end in themselves. As a scholar, I can attest to that. You get interested in the stuff and you spend all your time working on it, working on all of these technical problems and stuff like that. And that's not necessarily going to get you to being happier, living a happy life. And in fact, he says, sometimes people can come straight from the outer ring, the ring of luxury, which is, people that are basically just, having a good time when they're able to and suffering when they can't. He says they may get through it more quickly, because they're not arrogant. They're not all puffed up with their own knowledge. They don't think they know everything. They know they don't know everything. And so they have the humility to realize they need to find true education and to find their way to it, and won't waste so much time in pseudo education. So it is, and it's a part of, there's a good hunk of the second part of the text is devoted to this question, because it is paradoxical. It's like, well, wait a minute, is this pseudo education? First of all, the name doesn't sound like it's very valuable, but you said it can be helpful. It can be helpful, but it can also be a hindrance. So in fact, he uses a very nice metaphor, which is again kind of at the allegorical level. He says, take the provisions you need for your journey, no more. In other words, travel light. So I don't, in our modern context, I mean, I kind of hope this is not what he's meant, but it might be like, well, go to college, take philosophy 101, take it seriously and drop out. But no, I think, traveling the path does require you to, live as a embodied human being as well. And so the things that you learn in pseudo education can help you do that. Like I said, help keep food on the table and just help you, deal with life more better.
The next question that I have for you, you've already answered in part, so I was hoping for an executive summary. What benefits can readers expect from studying the Tablet of Cebes?
Well, I think it's, it's as I said, at the allegorical level, it's basically teaching a Stoic philosophy of life. And it's quite good. It's in my book, The Wisdom of Hypatia, it's the second degree of wisdom is Stoicism. Third degree of wisdom is Neoplatonism. So you've got the second degree of wisdom on the allegorical level and the third degree of wisdom on the symbolic level. So I would say, just reading the text at the allegorical level, thinking about it, and deciding, is this, in fact, does he have good advice here? Is this a good way to live? Would be a very beneficial effect. Now, as you may know, Stoicism is very popular these days. There's been a whole rebirth of interest in Stoicism. I don't like all of it because some of it's very superficial, some of it's very commercial. But it's because especially some modern psychologists, especially using cognitive behavioral therapy, have discovered that it's basically just ancient Stoicism. And in fact, the inventor, or one of the inventors of CBT, explicitly took it from ancient Stoicism. So it's a good philosophy. It's a good way to live. But it's not the best way, would be the argument. And so I would say, read it, take the allegory for what it is, think about it, see if you agree with it, and if it's a good, if it seems like a good way of living. Stoicism, I think, is very practical because it allows you to be happy by understanding what is in your control and what is not in your control, like in the Serenity Prayer. But it allows you to be active in the world, engaged with politics and other sorts of practical activities, and keep your mind together, So in that sense, it's a very practical way of living. And I think that's part of the reason it's so popular now. But then I would say, if you want to go beyond that, try and understand it at the symbolic level, or let the symbolic level work on you. And that will tend to tune you into sort of a Pythagorean or Neoplatonic or Neo-Pythagorean understanding of the text, which goes beyond Stoicism. This is what puts you in contact with the gods and gives you some understanding of the gods, and also helps you to interact with the gods. You know, what we talk about is theurgy, of course, is the more formal process. But I think that's better. That's why I made it the third degree of wisdom in my book. But you know, I think you could sort of stay at the allegorical level and you know, the Stoic essentially level, and that'd be valuable. That'd be very valuable. That's a better way for dealing with their life than many people have, and having a reasonably happy life. But I think, you know, the spiritual level goes deeper at the symbolic level.
Okay. The review copy which you kindly supplied me with only contained the introduction and the translated text. I understand that the final version will include a detailed commentary. Will this be a definitive commentary, or just a comprehensive starting point for readers to come up with their own interpretations?
Well, okay. So first of all, what I'm thinking now is, as you can see, the translation is published and in print, and I'm planning on keeping that as it is. So
Okay.
if you just want to read the text, just my translation of the text with no additions from me beyond that short introduction, then I would say that's what you get, or that's what you should get. What I'm planning to do in the second book then is to have both. It will have, as the first half roughly of the book will be, again, the text, just the text, the straight text. And then the second half, or more than half, is my commentary on it. Now, I say my commentary, that it's a combination of other commentaries that have been written by other people. So I've read a number of commentaries on the tablet from a variety of different perspectives. And some of these are very detailed about, well, what does this word mean here? And, you know, we can't tell what this word is. It's been scratched out. Well, what could it be? So some of it is very detailed, and I don't put in all that stuff because that's more for the Greek scholar. But but especially the interpretive stuff, I talk about the previous interpretations of this stuff, and I give my own as well. So I basically am using what I've learned from these previous interpreters, and then also adding my own interpretation on top of that, and basically telling you what seems to me to be the more correct interpretation. But as you can tell, there's disagreement about this stuff. There's disagreement about the number of rings. You know, some pretty basic stuff. But as in all of these things, there's disagreements and there's arguments on all of these sides. And I give a very brief summary of these things where it's relevant, and then, you know, draw my own conclusions, and then also just build on it, my own stuff, drawing from my own experience working, you know, with ancient Greek and Roman spiritual traditions and theurgy and things like that. So I couldn't, you know, give you a percentage. At least half of the commentary, I would say, is more or less my own stuff. I give references whenever I'm referring to other people's interpretations. So again, if you really are interested in it and want to check it out, you can do that. I try and always be clear whenever I do this stuff, because we have to go beyond the text we've got. But we could be wrong, you know, and I'm always trying to be clear about, this is, you know, some respectable scholars have come up with this stuff. This is my own, you know, wild and crazy idea. And I try and make that clear whenever I can.
I've just realized we've gone a little bit over time, and Hercules has been very kind in not cutting us off. So I'm going to have to start wrapping things up. So what current projects are you engaging in, and how can people learn more about you?
Well, so the main project, and I'm just finishing it up really, the text is complete, you know, modulo, a few more proofreadings. I'm putting illustrations, a lot more illustrations in the commentary part of the book. So that hopefully will be coming out maybe in a month, you know. I haven't even figured out what I'm going to title it yet, because I got to make it sure it's obviously different from the other book. And so I've done that. That's pretty much done. As you know, I also recently published Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie's Pagan Bible. The subtitle is Angels, Ancient and Modern. It basically collects together a bunch of ancient texts about daimons, guardian spirits, angels, all of those kinds of beings, mostly Greek and Roman. You know, you can find them all these texts elsewhere, but here they are all in one book. So that's also published. Best way to find out about this stuff is to go to my website, opsopaus.com. That's opsopaus.com. And I have pages describing all of these things. And when the books are available online, I will have links to get. What I did with the first one was it was available as Kindle, hard copy, and soft copy. So whatever form you like or want to pay for, that's you can get. And I expect to do the same thing with the next one too. So those are my projects. As you know from our email, I'm going to be presenting at WitchCon in a little over a month, and that's all that's definite right now.
Yeah, I'm actually very interested in your upcoming book, the Pagan Bible. Daemons are a particular source of interest for me, but we're going to have to wrap that up. So, Apollonius, thank you so much for coming on the show and letting us get to know you just a little bit better. And I wish you success with all your future endeavors. And have a good night.
Thank you. Same to you, and thank you, Hercules, too.
Thank you. I don't know if we're still on or not.
Here he comes.
Oh, here it comes.
We're done, Hercules.
We're done.
Hey, awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I learned a lot. And if you want, Apollonius, if you want to do a special like this on each of your books for your growing library, we could do that. And then you could use it for, promoting the books.
Oh, that's great. That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
So to be discussed, to be continued. I'd like to approach your books from somebody who goes into stories. That's a technique I learned long ago, and I wrote about it for our current project.
Oh,
and
good.
So I would love to experiment with going through the story and sharing my experiences.
Oh, that would be fabulous. Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, I wish you all well. Thanks again. This was an awesome show, and we'll leave the comedy toward the end. See you later.
Okay, good night.